Spark Partners, Adam Hartung and Manny Turan, business growth experts, teaching you how to understand your customers and harness the power of trends. Present the Business Trendsetter Podcast. Welcome to the Business Trendsetter Podcast, where we talk about trends and how to use them to grow your business. My name is Manny Turan.
And I'm Adam Hartung.
We are Spark Partners. We're here every week to discuss all things growth, all things trends. And we talk about new companies, old companies, and ones that are kind of in between. And today's topic has to do with an icon over the past 30 years in the coffee industry, and that's Starbucks. Starbucks has made some inroads and had some leadership changes in the past and are now contemplating some new changes and more changes. And it kind of cuts down to the core of the difference between value and value delivery, of which we speak a lot here at Spark Partners. So let's start off there, Adam, with discussion of all these new changes at Starbucks.
Yeah, well, they got a new CEO, and he was handpicked by the previous CEO, which almost always goes badly. I never quite understood why. It had something to do, I think, with the old CEO being ego tied to the business and having all kinds of blind spots or something like that. But anyway, I just know that it usually causes a lot of problems. And in this case, it's causing a boatload of problems. I remember, I'm old enough to remember a long time ago when Starbucks first came on the scene. And when I got out of business school back all the way in 82, I had the opportunity to start to do some work quickly in the UK and in Europe. And one of the things that I learned really fast was that when I went to those countries and we were doing business, in the UK, we would go to a pub and we would have a pint of beer and we would talk about things that were going on. Even at lunch, we'd have a pint of beer. When I went to France, we would meet often in the morning, meet at a cafe and have a coffee. For lunch, we might meet at a cafe, have lunch and a glass of wine. And in the afternoon, if we met, we'd meet again at a cafe and have a coffee, a tea, or a glass of wine. Which is very common, just meet at the cafes outside. Even in the winter, they'd put plastic screens down, turn the heaters on, and you'd sit out in an outside cafe and discuss. And of course, when you went to Italy, it was similar, very similar. Obviously, the coffee was different. Italian-style coffee is different. And it was, you really didn't eat at the coffee shops. You might have a pastry or a sweet along with it. But this was common. I mean, this was extremely common in Europe at the time. And of course, the founder of Starbucks, the original value proposition was we need something like that in the United States.
Yeah.
We need a gathering point so that, if people want to get together, if people want to get together and talk about their lives, they want to talk to their children, they want to meet with their grandchildren, they want to talk to an old friend, whatever, they would meet at the cafe, right? Or they would meet at the pub. And they discovered that there was some similar things to that. But in Canada, they were a little bit different, but they were, again, coffee focused, the ones in Canada. And that was really the beginning of it. The value proposition was a place to meet, come in and meet. And, it caught on, and it caught on quick because in the United States, if you were, you wanted to meet with somebody and you needed to be on some neutral terrain, that was hard to find. You could invite somebody to your office or they could invite you to their office, but sometimes that just wasn't appropriate. You didn't want to, it wasn't right to do that. You needed to be in a more neutral place. Or say you wanted to talk to a recruiter. You couldn't invite a recruiter into your office. I mean, that wouldn't work out. And so we would meet in these neutral places, and Starbucks grew fast. There was a lot of people calling them coffee shops, but Starbucks really got into this, it's an entertainment place, and it really grew fast. We didn't go in there saying we're going to have a coffee, but you usually bought something. You usually went in, you got something to drink. It was usually a coffee, and almost everybody got something, right? But there wasn't any pressure. You just go in, sit down, and start having your conversations. And then as time went by, Starbucks, the original founding CEO left, a new guy came in, and he really went after this proposition hard. And he started saying, well, we should offer some food. People could have something, a sweet or maybe a sandwich or something light. And then he started looking at entertainment. And he said, why are we piping in other people's music? Let's really pay attention to what people enjoy that keeps them in the store. The longer they're here, the more coffee they'll drink. That was the idea. It wasn't push them out. It was keep them in because they'll probably buy more if we keep them here. And then they even got to the point they started making movies. And you're probably too young to remember, but way back they made a movie called Aquila and the Bee, and it won an Academy Award. And yeah. So this was somebody who was pushing those boundaries of what the value delivery system would be. Well, the old founding CEO just got pissed off completely, fired the guy, came back and said, we're not going to do entertainment. We're not going to do movies. We're not going to do music. We're going to cut back on the food. We're not going to do that stuff. We're a coffee shop. And that's what we're going to do, be a coffee shop. And he started launching shops till now we got to the point that there's a freaking Starbucks, across every corner from each other. And there's a comedian out there. His last name is Lewis.
Yeah.
He does a comedy routine. He knew the world was ending when he was walked out of a Starbucks, and on all three of the other corners of the intersection were Starbucks at the same place. Yeah.
Almost as bad as the mattress stores
here
everywhere.
was, that they just kept doing one thing and just kept expanding the value delivery system. Now work too in a couple other ways. I've never got into it, but people got into these frappuccinos and other drinks. Yeah, and I never felt
Right, all the
anything
fancy
other than
drinks.
that's great. I mean, here you are. You don't really want to drink a black coffee, or you don't want to drink a latte, or some of the drinks that I grew up on. But if you enjoy an iced coffee, or you enjoy a coffee that's got those sugary add-ins, then why not? Go for it, right? And I thought it was a great way to grow the value delivery system. You're now offering something that people really couldn't get much of any place else. And at the same time, you unleash the power of your employees. Employees loved working at Starbucks. They weren't franchise stores. They were company-owned stores. In the early days, it was one of the few places that people worked part-time to get some health insurance. People felt really gratified to work in that environment, and they enjoyed the opportunity to be innovative, to develop new drinks, and to offer them to customers. Then it all just kept, the value delivery system was supporting that notion of come into our store, have something great to drink, meet with your friends, have a business meeting, and enjoy yourself. And then, more recently, we had a new CEO.
Yeah, lots of changes. Yeah, I know when I started my career in sales, just to kind of echo what you were saying, I would spend lots of time, and I was doing sales in the western part of the U.S. here, and I would spend lots of time in Starbucks. They had free Wi-Fi. Of course, this is the days before the phones had Wi-Fi in the same way, hotspots, and they had free Wi-Fi. And
Well, that's right. That's right. I forgot about that. It was one of the few places. Yeah, one of the very few where you could get Wi-Fi. That's right.
And many of the stores were larger, expansive. There was probably seating for 24, 30 people, perhaps. There's a patio. And I know you're going to start talking about some of the changes, but there's lots of changes for sure.
Well, yeah. So the new CEO comes in, and one of the things that's happened is the employees with the old CEO, he'd start to beat him up. He wanted more profits out of the company. He couldn't keep adding stores the way he'd done it in the past. That wasn't working for him. In China, we did an earlier podcast a few months ago about how Starbucks couldn't grow in China because a really good competitor emerged over there, grew up hundreds of stores very, very quickly, probably had some support from the government. And it just, the opportunities for them to expand were weakening. They couldn't really go into Asia. There had a lot of new competitors there. They still had to, in Europe, they were still, they were not what they were in the U.S. because of the original cafes and the coffee shops and the espresso shops that were in Europe. So they'd kind of reached the maximum in terms of number of stores. And so what they did was they started leaning on the employees, and they started saying, hey, look, we want you to be more careful about your hours. We don't want you to have as many employees there. We want you to be more careful about food costs. So if you're experimenting and you're making 35 drinks and throwing them away, we don't really think that's such a good idea anymore. And so the employees started getting like, hey, this isn't the Starbucks of old.
Yeah.
And they said, maybe what we need to do is unionize. Now, if you're an employer and somebody says we want to unionize, there's usually a reason.
Yeah, for sure.
They're usually sort of like they're unhappy about something. But the Starbucks CEO, instead of saying, hey, let's figure out what we got to do here, said, I'm going to fight this. They took that egocentric CEO role of, I don't think you have the right to fight with me. And so I'm going to try to do everything I can to keep you from having a union. And one of the things was they got a ruling that the Starbucks employees couldn't en masse try to get a union. In other words, you had to represent yourself at a store. Each store was an individual store. And yet it worked. They started to get unions. So the new guy comes in, and what does he say? He doesn't say, hey, look, let's all get together, sing Kumbaya, figure out how we're going to have a great company. He says, I'm going to do everything I can to fight the unions. So, okay, great. Step one, piss off your employees.
Yeah, that's terrible.
We already talked about the demographic problem, right? I mean, everybody's got a demographic problem trying to hire people. So here you are, you're totally employee-centric in a Starbucks. People come in, and they're like, they want to order their drinks the way they want them. They want to be greeted professionally and friendly. They want to be served their drink in a friendly manner. The employees make a huge difference in that environment. They can get a coffee anywhere they want to get a coffee. And what are you doing? You're making the employees less happy, right? And now they're not going to want to work for you. They're going to try to work for somebody else. Then what did they do? He comes along and says, yeah, you know what? You can't come in and just sit and have a meeting anymore. If you're going to come in here, you got to buy coffee, period. We're not going to have you sitting here having a meeting and you're not buying a coffee from us. Well, I mean, that completely flies in the face of the value proposition, right? Instead of a friendly, warm greeting place where you can meet, maybe 3 people have a coffee, one guy has 2 and somebody doesn't have any at all, or somebody drinks an iced tea and somebody has a glass of water and one other person has a Frappuccino and they call that good. No. We're not going to do that anymore. We're going to make more money. So what we're going to do is we're going to get rid of that policy that people can just come in. Oh, talk about manipulating your value delivery system in the wrong way. Instead of fulfilling your value proposition, you're doing the opposite.
They've lost their value proposition altogether, right?
Lost sight of it. And of course, now that leads to the most recent action where the CEO said, yeah, we're not going to make all those drinks. It's way too complicated. It's taken too much time. The employees, it's too difficult for them to get these orders exactly right, make these drinks with all these different concoctions in them. So we're going to simplify the menu, even though this menu isn't up on a wall, right? These are people that have been ordering these drinks with these additives for a long time. And everybody has the thing they like the best. But we're going to stop that. Okay, I'm trying to figure out in my head, what's the value delivery system do to support the value proposition now, right? I mean, now I can go to a Pete's or somewhere else.
Yeah.
Where I live, there's this couple of women who have literally a little tiny building on a street. They call it Java Hut. You drive your car up, you give them some money, and they hand you your coffee, right? You don't even have a place to sit down. That's where I get my coffee when I want one, because I just get a coffee. And it's kind of like, if that's what Starbucks is just to get into the line at the drive-thru and get a coffee and move on, you're competing now with Java Hut, right?
Right, and all the other ones. I mean, over the past, 3-4 years since the pandemic, I've been carefully watching what's happening here in Tucson, at least, the local market. And the amount of small mom and pop shops has quadrupled. And the Starbucks, there's one here nearby where I live that went from one that had a lot of seating to one that has maybe 3 small tables and is primarily made for drive-through.
Yeah.
It just doesn't make sense. And, BlackRock is my favorite sort of national chain that I consume here. And this morning I went to a mom and pop called Cafe Maggie. Nice place. And again, they're competing against the Starbucks. And I walked in there and there was 20 tables and they were all full of students and people working. And guess what? Those baristas were just pumping out the coffees, the drinks, serving quiche and other things to eat. I'd prefer meeting there than Starbucks any day.
And those college kids, remember, you always want to get them young. And when consumer goods, you want to try to get them young, get them hooked on your product, make it enjoyable, because they tend to become long-lasting, loyal customers, right? So if they're grabbing the younger people, that's what you want. If you're relying on the 40, 50, 60-year-old people who've been buying Starbucks for 10, 15, 20 years to just keep coming back, well, the problem is they're going to die. It's not a joke. I mean, you're aging, your demographics aging, your customer base is aging, then it's going to get tougher on you all the time. And again, you'll get chopped up by the competition. Mary Lou watched a show called Landman, which is on Peacock.
Yeah.
And I didn't really pay much attention to it. I think I saw a couple episodes, but one of them in particular, I noticed it was early in the morning and all these roughnecks were going to work and they lined up to go to this coffee shop. And the reason they lined up was it had some name that was very sexually oriented. And the idea was the girls that were inside making and giving them coffee were seductive, right? And so that was why these roughnecks, oil roughnecks, were buying their coffee at this shop. And then I remembered back in Vegas, in Vegas you have these ones where people hand out coffee topless.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, only in Nevada would they allow something like that. But you start seeing, well, people will just chop you up, right? They'll start saying, well, what is it that you want? If all you want is a coffee, what can I do to get you to pull into my place, right? And I know that another example, the Java Hut, Mary Lou loves to go there and get coffee because she takes the dogs with her. And the people, when they give her coffee, they give her some dog bones for the doggies. And that makes Mary Lou very, very happy, right? It's kind of like, if I'm not going to go sit in someplace and have a meeting, use the Wi-Fi, I'm going to go over here where they remember me, they know who I am, they got my name, they make my coffee, and they give the doggies a bone.
Yeah.
So again, it gets back to what we say all the time. Know your value proposition. You really got to know your value proposition and move your value proposition with trends that help deliver even more and more on your value proposition, right? If you're if you're Netflix, you got to start giving people more and more content. And that means, hey, you used to give them movies. Well, now you're going to give them live. Give them live TV. Give them live sporting events. Something that 5 years ago, nobody thought Netflix would do. But they're like, hey, that's what our customers want.
Netflix is a great example of a company that has changed and has stuck with the same value proposition, made adjustments to the value delivery. And in the end, they're just growing for it. We did a podcast, a few weeks ago talking about just that. So let's transition now, Adam, from discussing what happened here and what's happening currently with Starbucks to another relevant topic that is in everybody's conversation. It caused a major disruption in the stock market recently, and it's got everybody worried. And that is, of course, the advent of DeepSeek, which is the big competitor to ChatGPT, OpenAI. And there's lots of issues at all levels. I mean, they can do much more with much less. So let's talk about that, and also some of the security and other business propositions or implications for small and medium-sized businesses.
Great. And I think for our audience, we need to understand that during 2025, 2026, we're probably going to do several podcasts around artificial intelligence and the players in artificial intelligence. And it's because it reminds me when the internet came to the market. In 95, the internet was prevalent. Large corporations were using it. The small and medium-sized companies were not using it. And this went on all the way well into 2005, where the SMBs hung back. They didn't really understand, what's going on. And that's for big companies. I don't know what to do. I don't know how to get started. And I'm seeing that happen again now with AI. I'm seeing the SMBs hanging back. They're saying, well, I see big companies are doing projects, but I'm here, they're spending hundreds of thousands to millions of dollars, and I can't afford that. And I don't know what to do. And by the way, if all it takes is one thing like DeepSeek coming to market and the whole thing goes upside down, I guess I'm thrilled I wasn't doing anything, because I might have been doing the wrong thing. And so now I'm glad that I wasn't doing anything. So I think our role here on Spark Partners will be to try to help you understand these things as they're happening and try to sort out some of this. And I want to spend just a minute about headlines. I do this a lot. Newspapers, magazines, websites, they're out to attract advertisers. To attract advertisers, they have to attract readers. To attract readers, they like to have flashy headlines, right? And what we have to do as business people is get past the headline, because the headlines are created by journalists and marketers trying to get you to read an article. And this was never made more clear to me than about 2 years ago. I read an article about a Harvard Business School alumni who, after he finished school, he wanted to be a journalist. And he had some credentials. So he gets a job with the New York Times to work on the business section of the New York Times. He was there about 18 months, and they said, you can't do this anymore. And he was like, what? And they said, yeah. I said, when you write articles for the New York Times about business, you sound like a CEO. You explain what they did as if they're not crazy or as if they're not nuts, and said, we don't want that. We don't need that.
Right.
And
they want sensationalism.
Yeah. They wanted sensationalism. So here was a very capable journalist, very trained, understood the business world. And the New York Times said, yeah, we don't want you. And they literally assigned him to be a foreign war correspondent. And that's what he went off and did. And it's an interesting story about his life and what happened as a result of that. But I tell that story because I want everybody out there to realize that the people that are writing about business and artificial intelligence are not people that work in business. They are not people that are deep in technology. Mm-hmm. They're not writing code. They're not making applications. They're not implementing them. They're doing interviews and they're writing about this. And in the case of DeepSeek in particular, there were some people out there like the Mark Andreessen of Horowitz, and he came out and he made an outlandish statement about this changes the world. This is a game changer. And so the journalists who want sensationalism say, oh, this is great because here's this very wealthy person, billionaire, who's done a lot in venture capital. We can say he's a tech expert, and he said something outrageous. So that's what we're going to report on.
They stuck to that.
And I think people need to understand that what happened with DeepSeek was not nearly as outrageous as the media has made it out to be. And of course, that passed along. Now you have people trying to do secondary articles, and they're saying, oh, the world got all upset by DeepSeek. What's the next thing that's happening? Forget the first part. Forget the crazy, like it changed the world, because it didn't really change the world. I think so again, let's get back to understand what we're doing with artificial intelligence. It's all about the data. The data you put in will determine what you get out, right? Artificial intelligence is looking at a very large data set, and it's making connections. So ChatGPT has this very, very large data set of information off the web. You ask it to write an article about the history of Tucson in 1,000 words, And it can do that. You can say, write it in Shakespearean folklore style, and it'll do that, right? Does that mean it's good? And we keep saying over and over again, doesn't mean it's good.
Yeah.
Doesn't even mean it's accurate. It means it's a starting point. Because it went and did a bunch of research to pull some stuff together to get you a starting point that you didn't have to go do that research. Probably saves you a few hours of work. But that's like just public data. You don't have any insight there. So you have to come back and start saying, what is it that I'm going to do that's going to make this valuable? And that's where we start getting into other models. So you can get technology for somebody like Facebook, like Llama, and you can start saying, I want to put in data and I want to use that data. And now it'll be specific data that you've put in. So instead of it being other people's data, it's your data. And now we're trying to get things that are much more specific in terms of helping you. So you could start with a bunch of data in Llama. You could start with data that was from other companies to write an HR policy. But then you could take your own historical documents about how you wrote your HR policies and feed that into it and say, I want to now bridge the gap between where I've been and where those people are, and then take a look at it. So again, everything we look at in artificial intelligence is where's the data coming from and how is it used? Now, the other thing is that when you get something out of ChatGPT and what we call generative AI, it's generating something based upon a query. What we get with DeepSeek is now called reasoning AI. So the difference there is it's actually trying to do some reasoning. It's trying to say, when you ask it a question like what an HR policy, instead of just giving you an HR policy, you can put in, I want an HR policy that's targeted towards the aerospace industry and small and medium-sized companies that are operating out of Arizona. And I'm concerned about writing it in such a way that I won't go against the new DEI regulations. Now you got to have some reasoning involved, and that's where DeepSeek comes in. I don't want people to think DeepSeek's the only reasoning model. It is a reasoning model, but it's not the only one. So that's kind of so if there's a breakthrough, that's it. We've gone to a new generation of capability. Right. So now think of this again, like, okay, back in the old days when you first got a PC, you opened it up and you had a green screen and you had to load the disk operating system. And then you had to go in and try to load, you loaded data and you used a lot of commands. Well, eventually that moved away to where we had a much simpler interface. And eventually we got what we called GUI, which was graphical user interface, which now everybody that uses a computer sees the graphical user interface and they don't even realize that.
They don't remember what it was to start. Yeah.
Yeah, the GUI, GUI interface was we thought it was a huge breakthrough. Was it a game changer? It was a game changer in that it opened the computer for a lot more users. In the old days, if you set up a document, for example, using Microsoft Word, you still had to put in information into it, like how wide how many letters wide you wanted it to be, how big you wanted the margins to be. You had to put a lot of info in around what you wanted the document to look like. Then you entered the content, but you didn't know what it looked like till you hit print. And then it would come off the printer and you say, oh, I need to adjust the margins. I need to make changes. Well, the GUI interface meant that you could set it up on the screen, then you could see what it looks like before you had to hit print. So that made it more usable, made it better. So now what we have is AI that's going to be more usable. It's because it has the ability to do some reasoning.
Let's talk about a little bit about the security concerns and also with the, saying that they can do more with less, right? That they're saying that they can run on chips that are subpar and, the whole NVIDIA thing caused a whole ruckus in their stock value and so forth.
So first of all, security. It is important to realize that anytime you're using a model you didn't build, if you didn't go out and get Llama or you didn't go get another product off the marketplace and create it on your own, then the data you're using is somebody else's data. And the queries you make, somebody else sees. And we all know that if you do a Google search, Google's got it. Google knows that you did that search, right? We know that.
Yeah.
So you're giving up privacy. Same thing's true in ChatGPT. You're giving up privacy. Same thing's true on DeepSeek. You're giving up privacy. Now, you need to think to yourself, how much do I care about this? In the case of DeepSeek, one of the big issues you need to think about is the people that are looking at it are not even U.S. citizens. The people that are looking at everything you do live in China. It's a Chinese product. So consequently, they're looking at the searches that you're doing, the output that you're getting. So if you're starting to get into the how you run your business and asking questions about how you run your business, be aware that other people are seeing you ask those questions. They're seeing you look at the answers. They're seeing you modify the answers and ask second and third level queries.
Mm-hmm.
So you could be giving away information into a Chinese database that could go anywhere. So is it a security concern? Yes. Google searches can be a security concern, right? Anytime you give up your privacy, you have a security concern. And that's certainly happening with DeepSeek. And
Right.
you should be aware of that.
Italy just recently banned it in their country, for instance.
Well, yeah, because obviously you can accidentally give away information because you get so used to start using it, you think you're talking to yourself, right? You're interacting with the computer. It feels like you're talking to yourself. It doesn't feel like that you're giving away information. But you can do some simple things that will help you understand just how this DeepSeek has its issues. Go ask it a question like, what was the cause of Tiananmen Square? Or were the students wrong at Tiananmen Square? For those of you out there that might remember, this goes back quite a few years to the 1980s, but it was when the students in China led not really a riot, but they stopped an army parade in a place called Tiananmen Square. And it was a big deal because they stopped the parade. Okay, now if you ask DeepSeek any questions about it, you will not get answers. In fact, you'll get responses if you push it hard enough that says that they're not allowed to give you an answer because it violates Chinese policy. I'm not joking.
Really?
Ask the questions, get after it hard enough, ask them about things that are really important to the government of China, and you will get answers that say that this violates Chinese policy. We will not answer this question.
Really
you must use a
interesting
different platform. So again, be aware. And so just like we've talked about, you get hallucinations. That's the word we use for mistakes in artificial intelligence. So we could ask, ChatGPT to write us an HR policy and it could give us something ridiculous, right? You could ask it, I want it to be DEI compliant. It might come back and use a racist slur, for example. Like, oh, that was crazy. Well, yeah, but that's what you're going to get when you ask a computer a question. Same thing is true here. You have to be aware that you're asking questions and they will hallucinate. It will imagine an answer. The more you ask the computer to reason, the more you're giving up your insight for the computer to draw lines between dots.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't know the dots. You didn't put the data in, so you don't know the dots.
Right, garbage in, garbage out, right?
Yeah. So you got to be very careful that when you look at that it does make sense. Is this a tool that eventually you would be able to use? Yes, you can download the app. You can download DeepSeek onto your computer and onto the app, and you can actually feed it your own data, and you can have it do its own searches. If you isolate that off of the DeepSeek platform and run it on your computer, there's less privacy given away. But I want you to be careful. It's not no privacy. Like, it's not like you're protected. There are other reasoning models that I would highly recommend you take a look at if you're going to do it, to use your data. Now, I want to be also clear about where this data comes from. ChatGPT started by trying to look at all the data on the internet, and that's not a joke. Every New York Times, Washington Post, San Francisco Chronicle article, every website, my website, adamhartung.com, sparkpartners.com, they tried to screen off all of that to get its data. Now what we're doing is we're distilling the data, all right, which is an appropriate term. We're not taking all of that data and looking at it. We're distilling it into buckets and columns and thinking of it in sort of a quasi or a meta format. Like, well, instead of just raw data, let's go one level beyond. What was this article about? How was this being used, right? And that's why we can get into reasoning. It's because it moves beyond just a bunch of facts into how people accumulated those facts or put those facts together. And that's called distilling. Be aware, everybody distills now. DeepSeek's not the first person to do it. One of the reasons DeepSeek works quickly and gets answers faster with less cycles is because it doesn't look at all the data. It looks at distilled data. Mm-hmm. So one of the reasons it's faster is just literally, so they're saying, well, oh, look, I'm getting these answers from DeepSeek without having to run so many NVIDIA chips, et cetera. Well, that's because they're looking at distilled data, right? It's kind of like, if you started off and said, hey, I want to make an apple glaze for my turkey. And somebody said, well, okay, here's a bunch of apples. Then you got to make them, boil it all down to everything. The other option is somebody could say, well, here's cider. Okay, you've distilled the apples into cider. Now you take the cider and you make it into glaze. It's made your life easier, right? You started with something distilled. That's what we're doing now. And it's not just them. Microsoft, on its platform, it's got distilled data, right? I mean, it's already pulling it out on Copilot. that if you go use Copilot, it's got using distilled data
Mhm.
on that. That reduces the power consumption. You don't need to search as much. You don't need to go as broadly. You can make quicker connections. So that's why it's getting a lot of these answers more quickly. Is that a breakthrough? Hey, it's faster. It's cheaper. We do things on our phones today that I couldn't do on a computer 30
Right.
years ago, right? So in that way, yeah, it's a breakthrough. But I'd call it more of a stepwise breakthrough. It's a continuous improvement, and it's all very predictable. Yeah, we expect this to keep coming. And the point here is, if you didn't know what you were doing on ChatGPT, you're going to know less about how to use DeepSeek or a reasoning
Yeah, I
model.
was just going to actually talk about that because the market reacting the way it did and people throwing their arms up and freaking out about the DeepSeek thing and the government getting involved, I think there's just a significant lack of information and they're just operating from a further point of reference. I mean, I use ChatGPT quite a bit. And yeah, I'll put my toe in the water to see how DeepSeek works. But I recognize that when that whole NVIDIA thing, when the stock market fell, I'm thinking, really? Just because of one thing, the entire stock market's going to go crazy now? It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, well, Mary Lou used a reasoning model the other day. She took 10 photographs of herself. She put them into the reasoning model. She said that she wanted a business picture, and it shot her back 50 new pictures it took pictures of her face and her head and her hair and all this kind of stuff. And then it manipulated them around to try to create what was a virtual picture, not a real picture, and she wanted to capture the essence of herself rather than having to take 400 photographs and say that one's best. She was able to use this DeepSeek, the reasoning model, to come in, look at 10 pictures of her, put some pieces together, give her 50 to look at, and then she could pick the one that she liked, right? So that's an application one could be using today. That's what I want to come back to. You need to be using this today. Don't wait, because if you didn't use enough ChatGPT, now you're into the distilled data, and you're going to be like, okay, I never learned how to use the big data. I'm not sure what to use the distilled data. You're going to get farther and farther and farther behind, right?
Mm-hmm.
And again, all these apps are going to run on our computers. We're going to keep making the software smaller and smaller and smaller, right? There was a time when you had the whole limit on what you could do on a PC was how much memory could I put on the PC, right? How fast could the microprocessor run? We don't even talk about that anymore. Right?
Yeah.
We got massive amounts of memory. We have massive amounts
It
of
doesn't matter
computer
anymore
software.
like it did 20 years ago.
And so that's where we're headed right now with artificial intelligence. It's like, okay, there are limits to it, but I want people to be aware also. DeepSeek this wasn't created from nothing. They have 50,000 Hopper chips. They spent over $1 billion putting together their foundry for creating DeepSeek and operating DeepSeek. This notion that they just did the whole thing on, I don't know, PC chips or 8086 chips or something. I don't know where that kind of crazy talk comes from. They've got a big investment, well over $1 billion in their foundry that they use for creating the product that they have, which in and of itself is a limited product. But kind of concluding this segment, what I'd like to come back to is what DeepSeek is saying is there's more and more applications. So just like the PC, just like the mobile phone, every time something like this happens, it means there's more and more applications, more and more uses. And you need to get in front of this. You need to think about it. And you need to start using it. And the reality is, yes, it's going to get cheaper. Every 6 months, every year, it's going to get cheaper.
It's going to get cheaper for everybody, not just DeepSeek.
Exactly. It's going to get cheaper. It's going to get better. We're going to start to understand how to use our own data. We're going to be able to understand how to distill our own data. We're going to know how to put different data models together to try to get better answers out of it. All of that is easily seen going forward. So right now, you should be saying to yourself, well, the only bad thing about DeepSeek is that I was surprised. If you're saying that, then it's like, yeah, you were surprised because you're not in the game. If you were in the game like us, then you would have said, yeah, this is just like
you got to get
step,
in the game. Right? You got to get in the game.
Yeah, and don't pay any attention to Mark Andreessen, who's out there trying to make you think he's, the most brilliant venture capitalist who ever lived. I mean, he's in it for the ego. Now he's got his billions of dollars. That's not who you want helping you. Who you want helping you are people like us that can say, look, this is where you start. This is where you get going. You can start with Copilot from Microsoft. You can start with Llama from Facebook or from Meta. Get out there. The Azure, there's an Azure AI Foundry, literally on Microsoft that you can access. And if you're not accessing it, if nobody in your company is accessing it, the question is why? You're using Microsoft Excel, Word, PowerPoint. Why aren't you using the Azure's AI Foundry? Right? It's there. It's ready for you. It's a product. What if you would start creating PowerPoint presentations 20 years ago? Isn't it time to start getting going with some of these AI applications that you could use today? What DeepSeek says is it's coming. It's going to be just like the internet. It's going to be everywhere, and everybody's going to use it. And if you think you can run your business on 3x5 index cards with a telephone, you can't. And that's what it's going to feel like in a few years if you're not able to use artificial intelligence.
Yeah, times have changed. And if you're not changing with the times, they're going to pass right by. So,
for sure. And we'll have more follow-ups on this. And hopefully people will understand you need to get going. And if you don't know what you're doing, call us. For criminy sakes, call us. We've been coaching people for 30 years. Like I said, in the 1990s, I got started helping people think about how to use the internet when people were kind of clueless. When the iPhone first came along and we could really start doing applications, people were still kind of like, I don't know, do I need an app? The answer was, yes, you need an app. Mm-hmm. Let's get started. Now I'm telling you, you got to start using artificial intelligence. And whether you can start with ChatGPT is not an irrelevant product. That's a place to start using it. But you're going to be needing into these reasoning models in the next few months. This is not a future thing. It's now thing. Yeah. So get ready to start using it. Get yourself educated. And that means go start using these tools. And you can go right to Meta. You can go right to Microsoft. Those are the two easiest places
all there.
To get started.
Yeah, very well said, Adam. With that, we will conclude today's podcast, and we will talk to you next week.
Thank you, Manny.